Hello, welcome back. Nice to see you today. This is Peter Cox introducing you to the next 6 months. The Daily Show, at least we're here for the next month, when Mark Thomas, management guru and author, looks ahead and tells us about the big picture, the things that are going on in our society at the moment that are shaping the future for the next 6 months and beyond. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm extremely well, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. I mean, I'm just a bit dazed and confused still from the American election. Yesterday, we looked at the possibility of, well, whole-scale change happening. What do you see happening in America if present trends continue?
Well, if present trends continue, then the future doesn't look great for America, because for the last 40 years, the trends have been ominous. A process that we've called mass impoverishment has been in play. And the result is that many people in the US are poorer than they were 40 years ago. At the bottom of the screen, it's talking about the UK, where many people are poorer than they were in 2007. But it's been going on for longer. And so it's more serious in the States. So the States really could end up as a very unpleasant kind of country, where you've got a tiny number, relatively speaking, of extraordinarily wealthy people and a huge number of people living in poverty.
Okay, but is this just theoretical? I mean, are you just sort of projecting ahead and saying this is something that could happen, but it's never actually happened yet anywhere?
No, it's not theoretical. And we can see that countries that go down that track actually can become very, very unstable. So I started looking at these issues, in fact, because I began by analysing the Arab Spring, where, as you may remember, there were about 20 countries in the Arab world which ended up having riots and uprisings.
Sure, yeah.
And we looked to see if we could understand why that had happened, why those countries, why not other countries. And we came up with actually quite a simple way of looking at it, which I can explain in a minute. And if I apply that same way of looking at things to the US today, then it's quite concerning. So
wow.
The mental model is exactly. So the mental model is of a pressure cooker. If you imagine that you had a pressure cooker and you actually wanted it to explode, what would you do? Well, you would fill it with a volatile liquid, you would put a lid on the top, you'd make sure there was no valve in the lid, and you'd put it over very high heat, and then it would probably explode.
Sure.
And that the analogy with a country is this, that high heat corresponds to economic deprivation or widespread poverty. A volatile liquid corresponds to an organization which is divided among itself and possibly violently so by religious or political or class or racial lines. A valve is a well-functioning democracy which allows you to let off the pressure. Okay. So, in principle, if you're in a democracy and you don't like it, that's fine, because you've only got to wait 4 more years and then you can vote them out. But if you can't vote them out, suddenly there's no way of releasing the pressure. And the lid on top, of course, makes the difference between something which would actually explode and something which would just boil over, which is messy and horrible, but not quite the same as an explosion.
Okay, so I'm just trying to visualize this. In your book, there is a chart that gives, or as always, because you're a fantastic management consultant, you've got all the options carefully tabulated. Let's just have a look at it and talk us through, please.
So, so I've just talked through what's on the outside, which is effectively the democratic safety valve or not, the united population or the divided population, the little poverty or the great deal of poverty, and the rule of law or not. Now, America has a proud history as a thriving democracy, which is where you've got a properly functioning democratic safety valve, you have got the rule of law, you've got little poverty, little economic hardship, and you've got a, broadly speaking, united population. That's where America's coming from, but that's not where it is today. Today, we have a lot of people in poverty, and a lot more actually in the last few months because of COVID, which has caused huge job losses, and more people are falling into poverty almost by the day. So we have got economic hardship. We've got some questions over the rule of law. America's, again, always had the rule of law, but in the last 6 months, we've seen armed militia gangs storming the governor's office. We saw just, I think, a couple of days ago, the police had to thwart a terrorist attack on a vote counting centre. And that's not a sign of a democracy which is healthy.
No,
and then very recently, President Trump has been sending out messages saying that the election has been stolen from him. He claimed that he would have won it, except for all the votes that went against him.
Yeah,
and
very
they
banana
shouldn't
republic.
be counting.
Yeah.
Very banana republic. So the result is that we're now in a situation where you have got a lot of poverty. You've got questions over the rule of law. You've also got questions, even though Biden's now accepted as president, not everybody accepts it because Trump has a lot of supporters and he's made it very clear to them that they shouldn't accept it. So you've got a divided population and a lack of belief in an effective safety valve. And that means America could go to gangland, could explode.
Okay, so I understand that. So, what I need you to do, please, is to tie all this up, because we've been learning about the idea of mass impoverishment, which is the direction we're headed in. How is that connected with these scenarios you're painting here?
Well, so Biden needs to be successful, he needs to recognize that that's where America is right now. And that gives him two sets of problems. It gives him some long-term problems that he can't fix immediately. There's no silver bullet. Having a divided nation, there's nothing he can do in the next 6 months that will dissolve all those boundaries and all those barriers and all that mutual distrust. But there are some things he can do in the next 6 months. And if he doesn't do the right things in the next 6 months, he won't get the long term that he needs to tackle some of the other things. So the first thing that I would do would be to institute a very generous COVID support package, because as we mentioned, there are a lot of people who have sort of fallen through the cracks. And of course, they don't want lockdown, because for some of them, lockdown means starvation. So, of course, they don't want to comply with the government regulations on healthcare. So a comprehensive, generous COVID support package will ease that economic hardship that a lot of people are facing. Secondly, I think the problem of division of the population can't be tackled quickly, but it could certainly be made much worse quickly. And if Donald Trump continues to utilize mainstream media and tell effectively half the population almost who would be listening to him that the election was stolen, that makes America much, much more explosive than it needs to be. So if I were Biden, I would be negotiating with him on the basis of a pardon conditional on him handing over with a very, very explicit recognition that he was beaten fairly and squarely, and this is the result. And if that if that doesn't happen, then I would make it absolutely explicit that the full force of the law will be brought against him for all his crimes and misdemeanors and all those of all his family. So the stakes will be very high for him. So I would be doing those two things very, very quickly in order to prevent the situation getting much worse, much faster. And then there are things that should be done in slower time. And also, I think for the same reason, he should be talking right now. He should be talking to the police and the security forces and indeed the military to make sure they've got protocols. And what are they going to do if there are violent revolts that start up, if there are disaffected Trump supporters who feel the election's been robbed? How are they going to handle it in such a way that it's not dangerous for the rest of the population, but also he doesn't inflame it? So that would also be on my short-term to-do list. But I would also be thinking about the longer-term things, because each of those four factors has a longer-term dimension, which is much harder to deal with and which requires many more of the sorts of actions that we talked about last time. You remember we talked about those 5 actions, which we probably go into in more detail some other time. But those sorts of actions are the kinds of things that he should be putting into place longer term. But I do think he's got some short-term worries because of the explosivity of America as we sit here today.
Yes, and it's not just America, presumably. America.
No,
is
it's not just
the,
America. Absolutely not. And this year, last 12 months, we've seen riots and revolutions in many countries around the world for precisely the same sets of reasons. And even if you look in the UK, we're not quite at the state of America, but we are becoming a more divided society. Poverty is becoming more of an issue every year. The rule of law. We talked about the House of Lords report, which was damning about the rule of law in the UK and the state of democracy. So these comments that I've made about America, in a slightly diluted form, they all apply to the UK as well.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that's fantastic, Mark. Tomorrow we will be back. We're back 7 days a week with you for the next month or so. It's completely up to you if you want to ask any questions of Mark, leading mathematician, and he doesn't like the word forecaster, but there's some very interesting predictions in this book. Ask him any questions you want to right here on YouTube in the comments section. We will see you tomorrow.